So
we have folks coming.
oh, that's good. Yeah, it's interesting because
Yeah,
I was just on the phone with a good friend of mine and colleague, and we were talking about some things, and I'm like more fired up about what we're going to be talking about today. And I have two shlokas that I want to like start the conversation that will unfold in many ways in what we talked about yesterday.
fantastic.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is, and Raelle is actually in the waiting room now. So I'm going to let people in the room. I'm going to put in the chat that if they would like to consent to be recorded, that they can come on camera when we come to the Q&A.
Yeah.
And so then I will place the timer on. I do want to make a lot of room for Q&A. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to do my normal long responses, and
Yeah.
I want to make space for the wisdom. We will have, some conversational back and
Yeah.
forth, but
Yeah.
still want to give more room because I know folks have questions.
Yeah. No, and this
So
is great. And then yeah, and then we'll see how it just unfolds because this is kind of like a loose. It's not like an official like lecture dictation process that I'm like, it's
no,
like I
this is
share the wisdom of Ayurveda, the science of Ayurveda, how it applies to like, today and then how it just kind of interacts and integrates into people's lives and things like that. So,
awesome. Well, I'm going to let folks in. I'm going to give them the prompt, and then I'm also going to just give a little framing. Okay. All
yes.
right. Here we go. So I'm gonna tell them, come on in. I think I can send a message actually to the waiting room. So I'm gonna do that first. Waiting room, greetings, welcome. If you consent to be recorded. I'm just gonna say, please stay off camera.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're going to let folks in the room. I'm going to keep folks off camera as we begin. And for the folks who are, yeah, I'm going to stop video. There we go. So welcome to Trust Your Gut with Black Mama Body. And we're here with Dr. Antonio Aragona, who is my doctor of Ayurveda and who is a doctor, a practicing doctor of Ayurveda, Ayurvedic medicine. And we're going to talk actually today about the wisdom of Ayurveda. Before we do, I'm going to welcome the folks that are coming into the room. We're going to remain off camera as at the beginning of our conversation, and then we are going to have open time and space for Ask Dr. A. As I call Antonio Aragon, I call him Dr. A. And I think that you all will get a sense for the resonance that I experience in my care and the care that I receive with Dr. Antonio Aragona. And what we are really bringing into this space, in the Black Mama Body space, right? A space that places Black women's bodies and health in the center of ecosystems of care. Means that we are disrupting a world order that says that Black women center everyone else's care before their own. And this ripples out, right, into the universe. This ripples out into those ecosystems where everyone has what they need. This is our belief. So while we are in this conversation about the wisdom of Ayurveda, we are talking about a pre-colonial ancient medicine. And this is important. This context is important because we are in the West, in the global West, in the United States. That's where we're based here in Philadelphia. And at the same time, we are a part of a global community. And in this time, we recognize that there are institutions and nations like the United States that place itself in the center of the world, where this is a part of a colonial history and past, and this influences all of our life systems. And there were life systems and life giving systems, life relational systems of medicine, of care, of sharing, of exchange prior to um, the colonial capture um, of bodies from stolen land brought to um, countries and locations around the world. And the indigenous practices of healing and medicine that are here for us all are available to us all. And I just want to share a little bit about, my experience with Dr. A. And we were talking, I was actually receiving treatment and we were talking about um, we were talking about Saturn, I think. No, we might not have been talking about Saturn, the planet, but we were definitely talking about astrology and Vedic astrology. And I was sharing a blockage that I was having. And this is where I talk about blocking your blessing. And I will just share that there was a teacher in Vedic astrology, which is the practice of astrology that informs medical astrology in Ayurveda. And there was a teacher that I had continued to go back to try to get information from on YouTube. But every time I would hit a block because it was a white man with locks. And I just couldn't get past the stories of cultural appropriation in my head. And I was missing the medicine. And I reflected this experience or reflected on it with Dr. A. And really it allowed me to sit with a larger conversation around blocking your blessing, blocking your medicine, and letting racialization get in the way of our healing. This is not about spiritual bypass, right? That race is not present, that gender is not present, that the systems that have kept us separated from our bodies, from each other, from the earth, that this is not real, it doesn't have real impact. And there is so much more available to us. And we are going to have a conversation and be in a flow about the medicines that are available to us. And I use medicine to talk about a lot of different modalities of healing. And today, I'm excited to bring in the wisdom that I glean with that comes with my care, by the way. Every time, every time I work with and meet with Dr. A to receive care, to receive treatment for my whole body's health. I receive treatment, mind, body, and spirit. And so I want to welcome you all, and I am excited to be in this conversation with you today. Dr. A, welcome.
Hi, good morning,
Hey.
everybody. It's always a pleasure to be here and share space with others that are open to a different level of conversation that invokes different level of intelligence that provokes thinking about the world and our relationship to the world um, in a very um, global way and also microscopic way. So Ayurveda has this capacity to be the lens of macrocosm and microcosm. There's a shloka in Ayurveda that's Loka Purusha Samya, and it's, sometimes it's translated like as above, so is below. But in Ayurveda, it's like as we are, so is. And so if we are connected to universal consciousness, it's like there is this oneness because as a little being on this little planet in the concept of the universe, we're a speck of, you know, cosmic dust. And then, and yet in our own realities, as cosmic dust particles floating on this planet, we seem so big. And it's like, no, but Ayurveda has the capacity to show us that there's this, switching back and forth simultaneous experience where we can go and teach us this many tools to kind of involve ourselves in that. And when we look at the world in relationship to it, it has to be all inclusive because it's not just exclusive to one thing or the other. And I wanted to start our talk with a couple shlokas that will bring us into um, you know, the unfolding of our conversation today and the sharings of Ayurveda. So this is
Mhm.
something that you could think about as seeds being planted, and each day you're passing, you're reflecting on these podcasts that we have and these moments of like laughter and deep moments of like, well, this is serious business that we're dealing with, the balance of it. Um, so as far as like Ayurveda is concerned, because it is a universal system. It's based on universal principles, and universal is not just like a mystic word being thrown around. It's like truly universal because we understand from the Ayurvedic clinical perspective, like the qualities of all things in all matter, and all things matter. And everything that is of matter that can be perceived even by the mind, if it can be perceived by the mind and the ego, then it is still a thing. It might be a subtle thing, but a subtle thing is still a thing because it can be perceived. If it can be perceived in Ayurvedic wisdom and consciousness and thought processes, then it must be a thing that's still tangible on some level. We might not be able to grasp it by hand, but if we can grasp it by concept, it's a thing that we can grasp. So when we're playing in the realm of consciousness and unconsciousness, it's like what can be perceived as the thing that can be observed. That means it still implies that it is a thing. And so no matter how subtle or realm, it's like I'm holding this thing, but if I have a sense of grief, that is a thing, right?
Mhm.
And so in Ayurveda, it's a universal system which encompasses all people on all planes, you know. In the yogic Vedantic text, actually, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, which is a very famous mantra that's practiced in a lot of the yoga classes. May all beings in all planes be happy and free. It's not just like some yogi was just sitting there going, peace and love, hippie love. Like this is that's cute, but it's like Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings in all planes be happy and free. And Ayurveda is like, yes. And so one of the primary scopes of Ayurvedic science is to understand, you know, I'll read the sloka so we can kind of lead into it. So let me,
Dr. A, can you tell us all what a shloka is?
yeah, a shloka is basically like a line in a particular text. Um,
Mhm.
so it's like a particular line that's understood to come from a particular text. That's like the
Mhm.
easiest way of knowing, like, here's this verse, here's this line, here's this, this presentation of information. And in Ayurveda, like we have the shlokas numbered, so
Mhm.
um if it's like Charaka Sutrastan 5, you know, that would be like Charaka's main text. Sutrastan is the chapter, um, and then within, or not necessarily chapter, but the overarching like section, then chapter would be like 5, and then shloka would be like 26, and that would be like line 26 of this chapter in this particular section of this particular main text. Like, the knowledge that comes from India, like, is so compact in like a zip file, which is why, like, on many levels, the intelligence is much higher among South Asians on average because of the capacity of how information is stored. Why they can know 5 languages by the age of 5. The average 5-year-old in India knows at least 5 languages,
Mhm.
yeah, which could include different dialects of India, etc., plus English. Um, so by age 5, like how intelligent is that 5-year-old to know 5 languages already before even learning like
Yes.
science and math and all these things? And that just comes very natural because there's this capacity of how information is stored, and we could say they're like packed into files, and then it's like easier. And the arrangement might not make sense to a Westerner because it's not linear, but that non-linear version is a way to challenge the mind to work in a certain way that makes more efficiency. Um, so in
Can
Ayurveda,
I
when we
just
have
pause for a
these,
second? 'Cause
mhm,
there's something brilliant there. And I feel like this is also a place where, the flip side of that could be interpreted as like, that there would be a stereotypical understanding of Asian or South Asian minds. Whereas I'm hearing you say actually the flip, right, is the centrality of the way Western minds process information, right? And that is an inherent thing, right? That there is a cultural relationship to knowledge and to connection with multiple dimensions and ways of thinking. So I just wanted to like lift
Yeah.
that up because
No,
that's
it's
huge and it could be lost. And I feel like I've had conversations also with so many people outside of the United States. I was talking to a sister at the hairdresser who's
Mhm.
from the Congo, and she was talking about how, yeah, when I was, 7, I could speak 7 languages.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to like, because that's huge. So I just wanted to bring that in. Thank you
Yeah.
for
And in
bringing that.
modern science, like having been a psych major and graduated with a psych degree, we learned that statistically it's known that if you already know more languages to begin with, that already increases the level of capacity of intelligence in a person's mind.
Mhm.
Um, which is true. So like Italian was my first language for the most part, and then English. And so then I already started knowing 2 languages by the age of 5. And then I started incorporating Spanish later in my teens and 20s, so I added a third one. The fluency of Spanish and things like that, that's still like a work in progress, but just knowing enough to get around in the world, and then adding in some of the Sanskrit slowly, which is a very encumbering process, not very easy to learn Sanskrit because it's a whole different realm of, you know, um, you know, just vowels and all these things, and just like the numbers of the alphabet, and like and pronunciation and positioning of the tongue, like these are all different things serving a certain purpose. And so it's like very complex, but so knowing just a little bit of that, so when I do look at a shloka, it's like, oh, okay, my brain is definitely working because now you're translating symbols and stuff like that. But like I definitely have a certain level of intelligence because of having at least 3 to 0.25 languages, you know um, and so this is about information. So this shloka is in Charaka, and Charaka is the main recognized first Ayurvedic physician, father of medicine, etc. Um, Prayojanam chasya svastasya svasta yat karashanamatrasya vikara prashamanam vikara prashamanam cha. And so the purpose of this science is to preserve the health of the healthy and cure the disease of the unhealthy. So it's meant to, Ayurveda is meant to, you know, maintain the health of healthy people and also
Mhm.
prevent sickness, but also cure the diseases of the sick. That's what
Mhm.
one of the main objectives of Ayurveda. Like this is why Ayurveda is here. Um, Another understanding of Ayurveda, we're like establishing a healthy life. The shloka is in Charaka also, because Charaka is very recognized. And with Charaka, the three main like recognized Ayurvedic physicians that set the tone for all Ayurvedic clinical specialists, doctors, Charaka, Shushrut, which is the father of surgery, um, and Bhagbat. Um, and so Chadak and Shushu were considered to be like the ultimate. So even Vagbat, even being a third of the main text, like he still refers to Charaka and Shushut, and a lot of what he created in his text was like a simplification of the basic principles of Ayurveda, wisdom, knowledge, and science in his text that are recognized as like the sort of shortcut kind of thing. But it's not a shortcut. But Charaka and Sushut were recognized as the highest beings of physicians that have this established knowledge that knew. To really be claimed as a knower means that the knowledge was indisputable. Debatable because you're like trying to understand what they were thinking, and through debate, which is called vada in Ayurveda, you learned and can sort of like unpack and work your way through like, wow, how did they get to this point understanding this thing that's cosmic and universal and medical and spiritual and emotional and psychological? They already knew, so you can't question what they knew, and there very few exist today as like the knowers, or what's called aptas, like a true apta. It's like what truly knows. You have to just know by working through the process of sort of working backwards to get to that their point of reference. And so Charaka is the first of all the texts for all Ayurvedic physicians to study. And so in understanding like what's the application of knowing like what Ayurveda does, it's to help support, healthy life. That means maintaining the health of the healthy, and then also helping prevent sickness and or curing sickness. Another shloka is Hita Ahitam Sukham Dukham Ayustasya Hita Hitam manam cha tacha yaktrok katam Ayurveda sa uchate, which means that Ayurveda has the fullest knowledge of all systems in the world to understand what makes a person happy and unhappy, um, uh, suffering, not suffering, things like that, and can understand the qualities of all things to determine like how is life to be optimal or optimized.
Mhm.
And this is like a basic simplification for our purposes. And it's like, oh, okay, so it has already this understanding that life is meant to be, understanding what causes suffering or what causes unhappiness to happiness, what causes, um, good health or um, not good health kind of thing, like hita, hitam, hita is like promoting goodness and health, and hitam is like not. So sukha and dukkha or like happiness, unhappiness, and it's understanding Ayurveda to understand like what causes these things, right?
Mhm.
And then another purpose of Ayurveda, from this other shloka, which is very lovely, which will lead us into what we're talking about. Dharma artha kama mokshanam mairogyam mula mutam rogastasya parahartaha shresasya jivitsasya cha. So basically, it's understanding that there are four um, life goals that Ayurveda serves as its primary function to support all beings in all places: Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Dharma is understanding a person's individualized purpose on this planet. What are you meant to do? That could be as simple as I am happy and content in my fullest experience of life being a sanitation worker.
Mhm.
I am happy and content in the fullest expression of my life, leading the military of some major country, right? That brings me joy, even though the paradox is there's an invite of war and death and suffering and all these things. But on a deepest level, we all have this capacity to know, like, what is our purpose here? Is it to be homeless? Is it to be just a mother with children? Is it to be, fatherless child? Like, when you get clear and like knowing, like, what is the purpose? And it's hard to get clear in what knowing the purpose is when you're confused by illness. So I read it's like
Mhm.
if we can keep you as healthy as possible so you can keep in your life and striving in a direction of like really knowing what your purpose is. And you are considered fortunate in Ayurveda if you already know what your purpose is from an early point in life, right? And how we know that exists, the quality that determines that we're in the right direction is when we feel happy doing what we're doing. So, how often do people really feel happy doing what they're doing in their job? And I remember one of my Ayurveda teachers back in the day, she said, you know, she looked at me in the class and she said, and plus some other classmates, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I was a social worker for 10 years, basically doing case management, etc. And I loved helping people. And I loved that I could use this as an avenue to do that. But I knew that that was not the passion.
Mhm.
I was good. I wasn't miserable, like, oh, I hate this job, I hate being here, I don't ever want to be here. No, that was not the case. Um, but coming into Ayurveda, like what Ayurveda does for my mind, my heart, my soul, my body, my health, my all of it, and then being able to share that as a paid forward kind of experience, like brings me the greatest joy. And I've had multiple astrology charts, and they're like, "You're supposed to be here. You were doing this before." So I'm like,
Mhm.
when we start talking about this, I get very excited, and that means I'm doing my heart's purpose, my soul's
Yes.
purpose,
Your soul's
and
desire.
that's Dharma. So I'm living my Dharma, and it will have many levels and expand and keep growing, because it should never be like stagnant. Um, Artha is understanding, it's like material gain, basically. And material
Mhm.
gain could be superficial, or it could be like, I like surrounding myself with like good people and friends and like some personable art effects or art pieces and like fabrics and like things that are like part of like my world that bring a sense of like that joy, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, because, it's like to the degree of how fancy someone gets that they might want to have like a 5-car garage and, you know, have a $1 billion estate with 18 bedrooms and servants. if the person's living their dharma and that's what makes that materialism manifest in that direction of like dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, then who's to judge, right? Because it's also how you impact the world from those places,
Mm,
right? And then kama is referring to like the actual enjoyment of these things, not the stressing of like, oh my friggin' God, I have this payment on this car that I can't afford, but I really want this car to be fancy to show off to my friends, but I'm not happy doing what I'm doing to work for this car. Like there's so many people that live this way, you
hmm
know? And so kama is like a goal, dharma, artha, kama. And then from these experiences of dharma, artha, kama, the goals, the final goal is moksha, which is like a sense of freedom. And moksha in yoga refers to like samadhi or enlightenment or liberation or like death and letting go of the body and kind of going. Moksha is also like what is the freedom, the capacity to be able to go like on a trip, but also eat healthy and also see an Ayurvedic doctor for healthcare needs and treatments and stuff like that because you can. And this is all sort of synergistically interwoven together in a way that's promoting like the bigger scope of things, which is like I'm living my life's purpose. I'm experiencing it by and through it things that are just make me happy in my surrounding and I'm happy with it and I feel free in my being and my life and my expression in this world as my own individual like soul in the universal cosmic play as I manifested into this body, right? So putting that all into like simple terms, it's like Ayurveda supports everyone everywhere, every part of the world. It's a
hmm
system that is designed when used properly and unpacked properly and applied properly. It does not discriminate. It does not judge. It does not hold any reservations, and just like in Western medicine, you're obligated to treat all people from a neutral point. Ayurveda says yes. As an Ayurvedic doctor, there's a whole list of like, what does it mean to be an Ayurvedic physician and all these things and the qualities of a nurse and qualities of a patient and qualities of just like medicine. And Ayurveda says, and as an Ayurvedic doctor, though there is no judgment or discrimination, there are people you should not work with, like people who are hateful, people who are trying to be the doctor that come in try telling you what to do as the doctor. It's like you're coming to see me for advice, but you're trying to tell me what your advice should be. This is not going to work. Use Google instead and try to figure it out from there, right? Because you can't argue with Google.
I mean, I know some people who try, and I,
Yeah, of course. You just turn it off.
yeah, it's exactly like I don't like this response. I'm going to Chat GPT now
So,
to
so
get.
Ayurveda will discriminate on that level of what is the quality of the person coming in at that heart level, at that soul level, at that intellectual level. It will not look at people from the standpoint of what's the color of their skin or their gender or pronouns. Ayurveda is just like, well, that's all part of the Maya. And Ayurveda doesn't look at people to that degree and say like Chinese people get treated a certain way, or Italian people get treated a certain way, or the Irish people get treated a certain way, or Black people get treated a certain way in Ayurveda. Um, on that superficial level. On a more subtle level, when doing an intake, we will ask like, what is your ethnic background? Because in Ayurveda, we take into account ethnicity relates to ancestral lineage, which is very strongly understood in Ayurveda as a proponent of managing health and well-being, because knowing what your genetic and inheritance was, also the ancestral lineage and like different levels of like what's experienced on a subtle realm of karma and soul and story and like all this gets acknowledged in Ayurveda.
Mhm.
And sometimes for some patients the medicine might be you need to get a special ritual done once a week on Saturday to honor your ancestral lineage because there's some sort of like curse or there's some sort of like negative energy or there's an entity or there's like which when I mention these terms people already might be like, oh, there's the mystical nonsense, it's not proven, it's not factual. That's fine, you don't have to believe in that.
But can I pause you for a second? Because I
Yes.
want to say that that actually was one of the confirmations for me that you were the right practitioner for me, because that was on, that's on my prescription. It is on my prescription to engage in ancestral veneration and to that's a part of my mental and spiritual mental health program that you've been working with me on. And I have been moving through a spiritual transformation that has been co-conspiring with my quality of mental health and physical health. So I
Hmm.
feel like I'll go into the doctor, and if you don't answer, if you don't acknowledge my ancestral resource, and if you look at me as though I have a preponderance for racialized experiences, right? So if you don't see that there's a systemic impact, right, that could happen to my community because of the way that systems are designed to harm Black people or to
Hmm.
harm bodies of culture or people of color in various ways, that's not helpful. But at the same time, if you can't see the resource that could be a part of
Hmm.
the treatment, then I see that as a barrier as well. So I think this is a brilliant differentiation nuance to work with.
Hmm. Yeah, and so I think because, like as I mentioned previously, as far as the four goals, Dharma, like for me, you know, what people will see first will be, I'm a white guy, although I'm a South Italian, which means I have black in me on some level. Technically, like to be technical. But again, the first thing is the contrast. And so here's this white guy in the US that is learning the South Asian system, you know. And Ayurveda has not written anywhere in any of the texts, and I have over 100 texts that says you can't be a white guy from the USA learning this system. It's only to South Asian people that the system can be shared from. um, Ayurveda is like Dharma. Well, what's the sole purpose? And the fact that like I've had this direct connection in many other lives, I do believe in reincarnation and things like that. Um, that's my personal understanding and relationship to it. Then it makes sense that I just happen to be born as an Italian. So I have the best of two cultures, Italian and India, because I love India. Like I go there and it vibrates for me in such a deep, palatable way that makes sense to my heart. And so the
Mm-hmm.
soul is embedded in the heart first, and that's where consciousness really is, resting in. And
Mm-hmm.
so it resonates and it creates this like visceral experience that says like this is the yes in my gut that says this is proper. And I'm not trying to take a system, away from its culture. I'm just enjoying the fact that I get to share in this culture that I'm not limited from. And
This is yes.
so I happen to be a white guy. If
Yes.
I have to do
There
consults
is a
and
difference.
if I did consults in the dark, then it wouldn't even matter. Because
Well, yes,
because the information that I would give based on the assessment would still be the same, whether I was white, South Asian, black, Chinese, any of these things. The information is universal.
this is so important because, you know, I am very conscious in my body, right? How how I have experienced the dehumanization, or how I've in Western medicine, or in, you know, my 15-minute doctor's appointment, where I'm not telling them how to treat me, but I am asking more questions because they're not asking more questions.
Mhm.
And I think this is really important for bodies who recognize that our bodies are interconnected with each other, relationally connected with the earth, connected with um, um, uh, all of our experience, and that
Mhm.
that informs health. And when health is whittled down to disease alone, disease without a more structural
Mhm.
understanding of how do we have chronic disease, right? Like, I think that then we as the patients become either victim or
Mhm.
um, a problem, right,
Yeah.
to be fixed. And we might internalize that as I am a problem. I have this disease. I am this disease. I am this problem. And that way it keep us from accessing a different kind of care
Mhm.
that could see the totality of our humanity, of our beingness,
Mhm.
and in relationship with the earth, and in relationship with spirit. And so that's like really deeply resonating with me. And of course, in my search for you, right? We both been in Philly all this time. And when I learned that Ayurveda was even a possibility, right? Like I did not, I have, been practicing yoga on and off, like on and off for years, but it wasn't until the pandemic that I started learning about and studying Ayurvedic medicine and Ayurvedic practices. And then I said, oh, this sounds different from every time I attempt to do any research on functional medicine, I hit a barrier, like folks are not taking patients for 50, 11 years, or my definitely does my insurance is not covering it. If you don't have insurance, that's even another barrier. And so I kept thinking there's nothing like this that is accessible to me. And I have access, right? I have high quality health
Mhm,
insurance, thanks to my husband's job, right? So I have marriage privilege, right?
mhm,
Because I'm an entrepreneur.
mhm,
So, I've worked for myself for 8 years. And I'm also, what I'm in, they call it the sandwich generation. But I recently was talking to a senior care specialist who said, you're actually in the panini generation because I'm providing care and resources for elders in my family, and I have a child.
mhm,
So all of this is here, and I'm trying to figure out how do I access a care that could see the wholeness of my body and my
mhm,
experience. And then I find you and this medicine, right? To your point, I experienced you living your dharma. I experienced the joy that shows up in your care. Like we nerd out. I love it. But I also understand the purpose and the intention for every herb you provide, for every recommendation, right? That it could be when I go to sleep, when I wake, what goes into my dinacharya. I understand the intention and the purpose, and I feel that in my connection with you, and the care. And so I just wanted to lift that up and see if there's any connections there, because I feel like that's very much a part of the freedom, right? This is a
mhm,
part of my moksha. This is the part of what has allowed me to feel free
mhm.
in receiving care and prioritizing this. If I'm not seeing, I'm not eating out. I'm not doing anything else. I'm seeing you, like,
Yeah.
because this is the source of my ability to fully live.
Mhm,
So just wanting to bring that into the conversation, especially for those who may be here who are, you know, considering the challenges that exist for folks to access
mhm.
quality holistic care.
Yeah, I mean, what you just shared is amazing because it's very true. Like this, I mean, and I appreciate the the acknowledgement for what my intention is every day that I start the day with. That I'm like going to the office and getting ready to see everyone for that day, and like what's the offering going to be today? And because that's part of like in my outgoing initial message when everyone starts the work with me, I'm like, this is a journey and this is an adventure for me because each person's going to come up with a very interesting story. Some are more colorful than the others. Some are more, you know, just like fun, and some are just like, wow, this is pretty heavy. Like, it's a spectrum that creates the variety, which creates the diversity, which creates this like excitement that it's not a monotonous like, oh, there's another patient today and I have to deal with this today. And yeah, because it's like every day is like a new experience, and someone might come in with something that just happened that you're like, oh, I have to do this, to support this person. And there is a flexibility, and sometimes it's still like, as a practitioner of Ayurveda, I am still going to say like, no, you need to do what I'm telling you to do. Like, you might not like
Yeah.
it, and we'll figure out how to make it work. But there are some things that I'm like, no, you need to do this. Like,
Mhm.
this is not for debate. This is not for like, like sometimes there is that hard line that I do have to be professionally say like, no, you need to do this particular thing. Like, there's no other option you know, and
Yes.
if you don't do this
I have
thing, then we can't
experienced
work
that.
together, right? So it's like, because sometimes medicine is harsh, sometimes medicine is strong, sometimes, medicine is bitter, but your purpose to come to me is to help you feel better in your life. my purpose to do what I do is to make sure I'm steering the ship properly, which means through every angle that's necessary for that essential goal. They
That's
will
right.
overlap and align, but sometimes it'll just be like, why are you telling me to do this? Because I'm telling you to do this, because this is what needs to be done. And and it's because of knowing like the background of like all the Ayurvedic information I have in my head that I'm going through very quickly to go, this is the right medicine right now for this person as much as possible. So it might be a little forced. And then if it's like you don't really want to do it, then it's okay. We'll just figure out something else. Right. And it's like what's realizable and what's ideal that will always be presented.
Yes. I think that's I'm very much recognizing like when we first started and you would provide the list of foods that I could eat. And like it's a very detailed, very specific list of foods that I could eat. And I remember first looking at it and I was like, where's the list of the things I can't have? And you were like, if it's not on this list, you can't have it. And I was like,
Yeah. Yeah, and
oh.
then you see the upgraded form that's like here's
Yeah.
the I start off with foods to favor, foods to avoid, and then I end it with like the foods that are absolutely to be avoided, right?
Yes.
So it's like
Yes.
it gives you like a clearer picture. There's always going to be like, well, what if I want that one thing the one time? Then I'm like, that's okay, or not right now, or definitely not.
Yes,
You
not
know?
right now. I remember you were
Yeah.
like, not right now. And then a year later, you're like, nope, still not right now. I was like, all right. And it's funny because my husband is like, do you know when you're going to be allowed to have this again? I was like, I don't.
Yeah,
I don't.
it will be eventual, most likely,
Right.
but not right now.
Not right now. He's happy with chicken. He's fine. I think
Yeah.
I would love to also just come back to something you shared about the I think this was when you were talking about it just popped out of my head. It'll come back. That happens. Um, well, last month we were talking about the seasons, and we were specifically talking about summer season. And I think this is something that's coming up for me right now, and this is about um uh how Ayurveda is responding, right? We've talked about this, like, talked about seasonal um, practice and relating to the seasons. And also, we're conscious of climate change
Mhm.
and the ways in which that is influencing the seasons and the way we experience the seasons. And I'm curious specifically about this part of the summer, right? We talked about this the other day, like that it's like monsoon season right now, and we're in the northeast of the United States. Um, and so we don't really get monsoons, but our hurricanes are coming
Mhm.
earlier.
Mhm.
And I'm curious how this universal medicine in this universal system is responding to human um, uh, change in the earth? That's like a big question, but I'm curious what's emerging for you as we're like as we're considering it and we're contending with it.
No, and it's true. I mean, because Ayurveda's been around for so long. And of all, different cultures over, millennia have had their own or have their own sort of basic connections to the earth and the elements and things like that, from African tradition to Native American tradition to South American tradition, and so on and so forth. And understanding the world from that knowledge standpoint. And but Ayurveda is the first of all of them to actually have created like a whole like medical system that's encompassed in these texts from beginning to end and everything in between, covering all angles. So it's like the first systematized scientific body of knowledge. And the principles that applied back then to the observances of the seasons and things like that still apply today. Just you have to unpack it practically with the right buddhi, like we talked about last time of intelligence ago. It's been raining for the past 4 or 5 days, which means that if I have pre-existing conditions like joint stiffness or heaviness in the joints or swelling, during these particular 4 or 5 days, what should my diet consist of? What should my exercise? What should be my sleep pattern? What should be the herbs and medicines that I should bring in, to kind of counterbalance the elements in the atmosphere that are definitely affecting my physical health or preventing, right? Because I read is about health care and
Hmm.
sick care. It's truly the system of healthcare and sick care.
Hmm.
Allopathy is sick care system. It's not most healthcare.
That's
It's
right.
not the best in like preventing things. It's doing its best and through its trial and error of studies and countless studies and maybe this is good. No, this is not good. Maybe this is good. Margarine was a thing and then it was not a thing because the fat and then it's like coconut oil is a thing and then it's not a thing and then all these things and it's like Ayurveda's like we already have this figured out.
Right. I
All
remember I
you're
came to you, I was like, should I try this oil? Because keto is this. And you're like, get back to your ghee.
Yeah. And so it's understanding like, these are the scientific pieces that Ayurveda talks about how to stay contemporary because it's always contemporary. You know, sometimes in the Ayurvedic community, we frown upon people that are like, oh my God, Ayurveda is such an ancient system. I mean, sure, if you're relating to like when it was first understood to be a system and how long it's been around for almost like 5 to 10,000 years, it's ancient, which can imply the negation of its capacity to offer what it has to offer today, that can imply that based on the perspective. But the other perspective is like, because it is the mother medicine, because it is, understood as like having this, large volume of information that's still pertinent to every moment in time because it's timeless or anadi, as it says in Ayurveda, then it doesn't matter when it started because it still has relevance today. And we see like in Ayurveda, in India that there are more institutions that have created scientific research to really help validate itself to not fit into the Western model of like the gold standard approach. Ayurveda cannot fit into that because gold standard is one size fits all. Ayurveda cannot
Hmm.
be one size fits all. The one size fits all of Ayurveda is that it will assess and fit everybody. And I've said this for years, which is, you know, Ayurveda is for everybody, but not everyone's for Ayurveda.
Hmm.
And that's because people don't want to like stop what they're doing. But it's like some people come and they're like, oh, I don't want to stop what I'm doing um, because I want to just live this life this way and I'm going to die anyway. And all these kind of like excuses that we give ourselves. Because I personally think, it's an excuse when someone, well, I'm going to die of something anyway. So why not just go out doing this? I'm like, do you want to live your Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha properly, or do you want to die short of the time span you were actually given? Right?
Hmm.
That's a choice. That's always a choice. Like even in astrology, you can ask questions about when are you going to die in the astrology, and you will get the certain windows at a particular time period when that's going to happen. And that can change to be sooner or later based on choices you make, because it's never going to be 100%. But when you're given information, you still get to make the choice. So if you want to do things to prolong life, I read as the science of longevity. Why is it about longevity? Because I want to live this life to the fullest capacity so that I can do Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. And then in doing that, that means I am having less diseases so I can do that. And
Hmm.
that means like I have to do certain things, which means like, yeah, I should probably be asleep between 10 and 11 and up by like 6. I should have my meals at the mealtime. I should do these particular things that are aligned with the daily cycle that happens to overlap with the circadian rhythm that's been around for 150,000 years. I should do these things, but I'm a little unruly in my mind and I don't want to, you know, and then that's fine because that might be in the chart. That might be a result of an imbalance that's making you think that you don't want to because of this, that, and the other thing. But I would think that if you're feeling optimal in your health, that whatever things you're doing to keep you at that point, you want to keep doing because you're enjoying being in a good, healthy state. I do. You know,
Yes.
if you're in an unhealthy state, you're not going to make the healthiest choices because from an unhealthy state, your mind is not always going to be clear. So you can't trust that mind at that point in that state.
This is also really important as I think about, the whole purpose of these conversations, this conversation series, trust your gut, right? To be able to trust your inner knowing, to be able to trust your body and your body mind, it is both essential for our health, for our longevity, right? To be able to go in and source that knowledge. And I'm also hearing, and sometimes your mind is messy, and sometimes your mind is foggy, and sometimes, right? And so the awareness here is really important. It's also reminding me of the conversation we had around prana dyes in the microwave.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
Right. And that, I constantly I have a friend who constantly is like every time she opens the microwave, she thinks about that. She's like, am I killing the life force in my food?
that's great.
And
Yes.
we are. I'm like, I know we have to make choices. I'm like, we do live we live in a time where right now I'm like, oh, I can't make a fresh meal every meal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need
I get it.
leftovers. What are we
I,
doing?
I get it.
So we find that the balance of those choices.
It's doing the best that you can, and you want to keep striving for doing better, right? You know, I had conversation with colleagues because at one point many years ago I learned like, oh, leftovers in Ayurveda shouldn't exceed 5 days. Then another Ayurvedic expert master that I appreciate, he's like, what? He's like 24 hours. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yes,
I'm like, I like the 5 day one better because that makes more sense for what I can do every day, maybe less than 5 days, like sure. Definitely not more than 5 days. Um,
what about the
and
freezer?
so 2 days, that's cool, 3 days, but it's like I get it. Like, would it be nice to have fresh meal every single day? Of course. And there's like a food rule also. Like, if you shouldn't have leftover with a new food combination. That's I haven't put that on the list because I think that'll stress more people out. So I'm just trying to
Yes.
get, you know, but it's like it's not just because Ayurveda is trying to be a pain in the butt. It's trying to prevent a pain in the butt
Hey.
because these are the little things that are like unnoticed by conventional medicine and daily living. And then people are like, eh, what do you tell a person that's on food stamps? Like
Mhm,
they're limited. I'm not going to say you have to get fresh meals every day because they run out of food stamps within a week, you know.
mhm.
Even shopping smart and things like that. So it's like, what can you do to make the best of what you have? And then in the bigger picture is like, what is your purpose in this life to experience too,
Yes.
as optimal as possible? There's like what's ideal and what's realizable and how much closer can you get towards the ideal to what you need to do.
Mhm.
Ideally, everyone should do panchakarma, which is the most aggressive Ayurvedic therapeutic protocol to reduce or expel um, the excess of the doshas, which is what really causes disease in the body. Um, Most people can't arrive at the ideal because it is time consuming, it is financially consuming, it is like a thing that's, it's like if you can do it, it's 1,000% worth it for sure. But not everyone can take off for like a couple of weeks. Not everyone can commit to the whole process of like the timing of this particular treatments and the particular medicines and the particular thing that you have to really lock down and shut out of your life for a lot. Like it's not practical for everybody. So we do all the things that are more realizable, like seasonal cleansing for people up until age 60, because then after age 60, aggressive cleansing protocols is very contraindicated in Ayurveda. So it's like we're looking
Why
at
is
all
that?
these. Hmm?
Why is that?
Because at that stage in life, so we look at Ayurveda like that looks at life in stages. And at that stage in life, the person's strength and capacity and their Vata stage of life is diminished. Just like in the summertime, it's extremely contraindicated in 95% cases to do cleansing in the summertime. It isn't appropriate to do any kind of cleanse during the summertime because the body's not strong enough technically on the various levels of the tissues and organs and digestive system. You create complications from doing that. So you do this at the seasonal junctions. So as we're coming into fall, that's a great time up until like early winter. These are good times. Late winter, definitely not. For the most people, should not be doing a cleanse, right? And so we look at those configurations of time, and time is a bigger picture, like where are they after at age 60 in Ayurveda? Deep aggressive cleansing protocols is contraindicated because their strength is not going to be there like it was there in their 20s or 30s or 40s, which will cause more deficit and increase more vata, which will be neurological issues, sleep issues, constipation, or they're like it creates this other way. There's a way, and even in Ayurveda, when we think about the word cleanse, we're like, what does that really mean? What are you cleaning? Right? It's really about optimizing the systems that require like support by certain means of herbal protocols and treatment protocols and little things to put in place to kind of like make sure things are regulating properly. You
Mhm.
don't know if you have to do a cleanse, right?
Yes.
But there does need to be a maintenance done at the junctions to support like removing any excess doshas and regulating the system so that it can do that. But cleansing, otherwise, it's just one of those big words that we use and throw around all the time. Everyone's doing cleansing. It's like IBS, like everyone has IBS. you know, and
Yes.
it's like, what are you talking about when that is the reality of things, right? What are we really talking about here? And Ayurveda is very specific to when we talk about it, you know, detoxing. It's another word that's very Western, and Ayurveda, we're like, what are you talking about? What does that mean? What are you trying to do? And you know, if you're saying Visha and Agada Tantra, which is like Visha is poison management, and you know, which is implying that there's a toxicity level in the body, sure, but that cause of Visha formation in the body is very specific. So then there are protocols to do Agada Tantra, which is like anti-poison protocols or antitoxin protocols, but it wouldn't be proper to call it a detox, right?
Hmm.
So like Ayurveda is very systematic. It's very specific.
Yes. I want to reflect back to uh my cleanse, or what I call the purge,
Yeah, the purge protocol.
the purge last fall, early fall. I think it was the end of September, the beginning of October. And then literally the next week, I got COVID for the second time. But this round of COVID was so dramatically different from the first time that I had COVID. And I'm certainly could speak to a number of reasons why, whether my body has a certain amount of immunity at this point. But there was, I believe, more capacity in my body to experience COVID than when I had it in
Mhm.
January of 2022, right after Christmas, where I was eating and drinking all kinds of things that were not on my list. I also just started seeing you, and I looked at the list and I was like, this is not real until the new year. And then I got COVID on January 1,
Mhm.
2022. But
Mhm.
I want to just bring that in, that there was I've now had this purge a couple of times, and have
Mhm.
experienced a dramatic difference in how my body functions.
Mhm.
But I think in preparation for a seasonal shift,
Mhm.
and I have been much more conscious of how my body experiences the seasons than I ever have before. I used to
Mhm.
blow through summer. Hot girl summer was my life. Like, I'm
Mhm.
here for my rosé on a rooftop. I'm here to dance all night
Yeah.
and wake up. Now, this is prior to a child. Uh,
Yeah.
but I am also mindful that I would also experience an incredible amount of inflammation in my sinuses, my allergies, etc., that would come in late fall. That
Mhm.
people will say, "Oh, well, it's just this is cold season." Right, that just becomes normalized. And I am so much more conscious how my body is treated and experienced in the seasons prior, to see
Mhm.
what the impact is going into the seasons. I've seen a difference in my seasonal depression. Like, I don't relate to winter, at least in this
Mhm.
last year, the way I've related to winter before, because of the care that we have been implementing in the seasons prior. So I just want to like bring that in here as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
I'm also mindful that we have some folks in the room, and I want to
Yeah. I was
make
gonna
space for
say,
questions.
yeah, let's bring that in now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if anyone has a question, feel free. I'm gonna put this on here. You can come on screen if you like, if you consent to being recorded. If you want to stay off screen, you can do that. You can raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat. But we want to open up for Ask Dr. A. Any questions you might have. And I've also dropped Dr. A's website, stillpointayurveda.com, into the chat. And this
Yep.
is where you can contact Dr. Antonio Aragona.
And I can meet
Um,
with anyone in the world.
yes,
Geography is not a limit either.
no, this is the brilliance of telehealth.
Hmm.
Um, so please feel free to go to his website. He also has an incredible newsletter where he shares tons of resources every month, including recipes. And so please check that out. But please ask any questions you may have.
Hey, Aaron, this is Amber. Hey, nice to
Hey,
meet you.
Amber.
Hi. I had a question about, as you mentioned, the fluctuation with whatever you need. I do have a question about how often does that really change? How do you check in terms of the cadence to figure out? I know you mentioned the weather, things like that, but like officially, the pro or like a working with you, like how would it work in terms of how quickly that dynamic of the definitely makes me a little bit apprehensive. Um, so that's my only question. I don't know if my question's fully did I really ask it, but the way it makes sense. Does that make sense, my question?
So if I understand it correctly, and just correct me if I'm wrong, are you asking like what is the cadence of like what does it mean to work with someone like me? What does the scheduling look like and things like that?
Of course, and as it relates to the actions after that with the eating and the herbs and things like that. In terms of dynamic of things maybe changing with a diet or with the herbs about what I would need. So
Yeah,
yes.
so that's a good question. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of ways to work with me because it's about getting Ayurveda into whatever capacity is practical for each person's life and lifestyle, and to see how much it aligns with what their health objectives are. Because, if there's something more severe, then it requires more diligence and more consistency, of course. And if it's not something as severe, then there is some more flexibility. So, some patients come in and I meet with them every 2 weeks until like, the checklist that comes in as the main complaint or the list of main complaints gets checked off. And that could be every 2 weeks until a year or two, depending on what the level of time is and finances and things like that. And sometimes it could be where you come in for the consult and then I give you a protocol. I meet you per season, and the recommendation sheet will reflect like, okay, in 6 weeks, you're taking this particular herb. And then at the seventh week, we're starting you part two of this. So that will endure like the particular season that we meet at the next seasonal junction and we get certain things in place. And so the protocol will always reflect like what's needed and sort of like create this sort of um, continuity. So even if I'm not meeting with you every 2 weeks, it could be like I meet with you once a month or once every 3 months kind of thing. That would be the cadence and see what needs to happen, and the herbs will fill in the gap plus the dietary lifestyle um, suggestions that are put in place.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just
Sure.
add, Amber, because I wonder, I was hearing also like when do you start to see a change or a shift? Did I hear that part of your question,
Mhm.
or am I?
Like how do we tell when to make a dynamic change with a herb or the food or things like that? Do we do blood tests, through like a or whatever through like a lab and we share them, or yeah, how do we decide what to
Well,
change
yeah,
and
I mean,
result?
I'm the one that decides the change of the medicines based on the outcome that's being presented based on what you're reporting, right? So if you come in and you say, I have visceral fat and I have, sluggishness, fatigue, brain fog, blood sugar issues, and I'm tired all the time, and my appetite is low, and I have diarrhea sometimes. And as I mentioned, like if that's your main list of complaints, and I start putting things in place, and then you start to say like 3 weeks later, oh, the diarrhea stopped, and I'm starting to get some increased energy, and I noticed that I lost 7 pounds already. Then boom, check, 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 check. Very simple. And
Mhm.
for patients that are also working with allopathic providers and they get labs done, they have thyroid issues, pre-diabetic, diabetic, cholesterol, triglycerides, all these things you know, sometimes those numbers are slow to change. Ayurveda doesn't focus so much on those particular reports because we don't need those particular reports. But we do, if there are reports available, it has a twofold effect. Once, it just gives us one more piece to view in our lens, and two, it's providing its own inherent scientific data to the medical community that's taking the test to see like what are you doing that's different, that's altering your numbers, right? So again, we don't give as much weight to those things, but they kind of help us in the background. And most importantly, it's like, how are you feeling after a month or two? Because then if it's like we're doing herbs for a month and you're like, yeah, and there's no changes, then I would reconfigure. And that lack of change will give me a different understanding of like, she's not responding to this, or he's not responding to this. So I'm going to do this protocol because the qualities that were used to see if this was going to change didn't change. So the opposite qualities would be the things, and that would create the change. And by month two, you're like, oh yeah, I'm noticing the change. I'm noticing all these reversals of symptoms. That's how you know. That's how
Mhm.
you know faster than the lab work. Right? Does
I
that
can
make
speak to
sense?
that.
Yes, it does. Thank you for sharing.
That's a great question.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I feel like that, when we first started working together, we literally started working together a month before I got COVID. And and that was the first time I got COVID. And then I experienced symptoms of long COVID, like that continued on for months, almost over a year past my experience with COVID. And during that time, I saw every specialist, right? I went to see my primary care physician at the time. They recommended that I get x-rays for the joint pain that I was experiencing. I had all kinds of panels done to figure out what was creating the fatigue, the chronic fatigue. I literally couldn't lift my head up, could barely get out of bed, would fall asleep in the middle of conversations. My menstrual cycle stopped for 3 months. My gynecologist was just like, well, let's wait it out and see. So there were so many doctors who did not, like, every time I brought up, do you think this is due to COVID? They said, we don't have any data, we don't have any information, but let's keep running this blood work. Then I would ask them to run specific blood tests. And they were like, how do you even know to ask for this blood work? And I'm like, well, I've been doing research. Please do this blood test. And yet, and still working with Dr. A, we worked through we shifted the protocols. You would shift and recognize exactly what was happening with my menstrual cycle. We worked with the amenorrhea. And that for me was really powerful because we were working with and I just want to share this. Some of I share all. We talk about bowel movements a lot in Ayurveda, so I don't have an issue at all. But when I started to very clearly see the difference in my number twos, in my bowel movements,
Mhm.
I then could correlate that difference in the consistency and the frequency of my bowel movements to um, when my menstrual cycle came back. And then when I started to experience more mobility and flexibility in my ankle. And so I just, Dr. A is obviously checking, but I was actively aware of parts of my or indicators of my health that I wasn't necessarily paying attention to before
Mhm.
that would give me a clear indicator of, oh, this might have an impact um on how you are feeling in your joints, even though I'm like, but this is my number two. How will I know? So I think this has been helpful for me. Now, coming out of long COVID, then we created a whole new series of protocols because then we were no longer putting out all of these fires. We were putting out fires for the first year and literally like inflammation, like we were putting out fires. And I know that I have a tendency to want to like do a deep dive study and be like, oh, let me study inflammation. Oh, this is, there are all these resources on anti-inflammatory. And to your point, Dr. A, the anti-inflammatory diet that you might see on a health magazine or on all the sites or whatever, it is for all bodies, which is not responsive to your body's specific needs. And so I think this has been really helpful for me to say, oh, I'm not just going to go and make this anti-inflammatory salad with avocado. Like, I'm not supposed to have avocado right now. In no world could I see me not being allowed to have avocado, because how could you go wrong with avocado?
Mhm.
But it is not a part of my protocol for a specific reason.
Mhm.
And I can feel in my joints when I have gone off protocol. I just want to acknowledge that. And I know the specific foods, like to the detail.
Mhm.
And that I didn't have that kind of awareness before. So I want to speak to like the shift in how I feel in my body. And then also in my awareness, I am more conscious of, and you help me understand the whys. And I think
Mhm.
that's important with Ayurveda as well. The why do I feel good? What is like why do I feel good? Why do I feel so good right now? Let me pay attention to this.
Yeah. Yeah. And because like, I mean it's all true and it's all great. And it's like Ayurveda has a different perspective on like the body and its presentation. So like, the buzzwords that we stay away from because they don't really make proper scientific sense from the Ayurvedic standpoint is like I said before, like IBS, cleansing, detoxing, even inflammation. So when someone comes in saying inflammation, it's like that's such a global word. It's like, what is that really like? What are you referring to? Like, sure, something is inflamed, but it can imply a lot of different things and manifest in each person's body in a different way. But we don't use that as sort of like the steering of that direction of like, oh, I have to work on an anti-inflammatory protocol. Like, everybody would not think that way. That's not what you think about, you know. Will there be swelling? Will there be any kind of like heat or things like that? Or, of course, I mean, the body's going to respond, but we're not going to be quick to go like, oh, they're inflamed. You know, it's just it's semantics, but it's also very Ayurveda is very particular and things out so specifically, so meticulously. It's like you follow the logic and you're like, oh, okay. It's like when people come in and they're like, oh, I'm doing this 7-day Ayurvedic panchakarma at home at 7 days of khichdi and all these things. And it's like, no, nowhere in the right mind would you have that. If it's properly done classically in Ayurveda, that's not even a thing, right? It's like they're buzzwords, and the buzzwords have lost a lot of like the root because it's so diluted. And it's
Yeah.
like too much. It's too much noise for the mind. We don't need more noise for the mind. And so, following like the Ayurvedic suggestions, will show us the relationship between cause and effect, and ideally get you from a rogya, um, or a rogi state, which is like a diseased state, to a rogya or a rogi state, which means absence of disease. It's like going backwards in time, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
any person that has any condition today, that condition exists because of accumulation of time that led you to this moment with particular things you were doing and experiencing and impacted by that brought you to today. So in
Yes.
Ayurveda, we're undoing history. When we're
Mm-hmm.
doing purging protocols or deep cleaning protocols, we're undoing history. That's the thing that's created this momentum of doshas, which are biological humors, loosely defined, um, undoing the momentum of these things so that the more space you have in your tissues and your cells and your organs and your systems overall, then there's more fluidity and increased level of vitality, health, and life because there's less to carry. So people, as they get older, their aging metabolism naturally slows down. And so even if they're avid workout freaks still at the gym doing their 7 days a week, which is great because that buys time for a lot of people. Time is not escaped by no one escapes time. You can slow down aspects of time, and time never lies. So whenever someone comes in at whatever age, because Ayurvedic clinicians see everyone in any age, including prenatal, you
Mm-hmm.
and postpartum and in utero and like all these things. Um, Ayurveda can and does have tools for all stages of life because it is about life and also supports people in their dying process because death is part of life. And so Ayurveda doesn't try to prevent death. It allows you to die with more dignity. So when people are like, I'm going to die of something anyway, of course we are. We have to. We have to die of something. Otherwise, we keep on living. But what's the quality of your last months, days, years, hours? That's what Ayurveda will restore with integrity, your humaneness, your humanity, in a humbled way, knowing, yeah, the final stage of life is to take the last exhale. How can I do it gracefully without having morphine in my system or oxycodone and having to do 17 medicines and on respirators? No, this is not dying with dignity in most cases, you know. It's like, how do we allow death to be the most graceful part of life? And also, death is the greatest teacher of life.
Mm-hmm.
And Ayurveda
Yeah.
knows all this. It teaches all this.
Um, I want to open it up if there are any other questions from the folks here. and feel free to jump in and interrupt me. One was actually coming up for me. And this is around, um, as you're talking about undoing history, the patterns, like the things that we're doing, our habits, the ways that we are living, and sometimes living out of alignment, right, um, with our dharma, out of alignment with the um, not only the purpose for our lives, but out of alignment with optimum health. A lot of these habits are a part of how we are surviving. And so I know I can speak for myself. Sometimes there's a lot of shame that I have wrapped up in like the way I'm living, or there's shame that I might have around, and I can say it's light like guilt, but I'm gonna be real, and that in acknowledging the difference between shame and guilt, and that me having a couple of cookies, right, could be like a guilty pleasure. But I also know when I can binge on cookies, and that's about feeding something entirely different, about
Mhm.
feeding a sense of worthiness, about dissociating, right? Leaving my body for a reason. That's a pattern. That's a habit that I've had since childhood. And so breaking those habits, or being confronted with those habits, um, can feel really hard. And I've experienced you being very clear, because Ayurveda don't play no games, and Ayurveda is very direct. Um, but also bringing compassion. And I'm just curious how you find the balance for folks who are like, these habits are locked up in a history that has a that has a lot of power in my life.
Yeah, and that's the question, right? It's how to show up to the moment as authentically as possible. Also remembering like what are the bigger goals and how can I keep doing the things I need to do to go in that direction, but also life is not a linear um fashion, right? It's not a linear trajectory. It's not linear. And so there's a windy road, but it's kind of moving forward in a certain way. And as you have increased awareness and consciousness and make different choices, and you know you should avoid this and avoid that, and you're doing pretty good and you're trekking along, making like, those items on the list of health complaints come down more and more. You're still having your maintenance in life, and you just, if you fall off the horse, you get back on again. You don't complain why you fell off the horse. You just know you fell off the horse for whatever reason, and then you just make the choice to get back on and keep going, which is important because it's like, I was talking to a friend, and they were talking about a mutual friend of ours that has chronic depression, and they're like, "Oh, poor him," and then the other thing, and I'm like, "Poor him" implies a judgment. I said, like, he might not be able to get out the house and do very much, and he's living basic. I'm like, but the fact that he still gets up to at least wake up out of bed, that's good, right? That's important to acknowledge that piece. He might not be doing the most optimal things, but considering the spectrum, he woke up today to
Mm-hmm.
look at today and made a choice to
Mm-hmm.
go from the bed to the living room. Like, you have to go there and just know, like, sure, you might not be eating 3 meals a day or eating the right meals at the right time. Like, he woke up, right? And that's the most important thing, because as long as you keep waking up, you have a purpose. And if you still exist on this planet in this present moment, you must have a purpose, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be here. Maybe the purpose is just to be simply alive right now, going through your own experiences, right? And
Mm-hmm.
understanding like there's a humanity piece to this, and everyone has a history and a story of how we got to this point and how the mind plays, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
have to eventually get to a place, or ideally get to a place, where you can see the mind for what it is as a thing. Because if you can see the mind and your own thinking processes, then as we talk about in yoga, if you're able to perceive the mind and perceive the thought processes, then who's the perceiver, or what is the perceiver? Because, and then if that which is doing the perceiving is perceiving something, then that thing that is perceived is a thing to be perceived.
Aha.
So if I see that thought, I am perceiving it. And for a
Yes.
fraction of a second, there is that sort of divisiveness that can happen because the ego is always just trying to like do quick gratification. And you see that and you're like, oh, I don't want that cookie right now. I shouldn't have that cookie right now because I'm congested. And the ego's like, I don't care. I want it. I need it. And you succumb to that, then you get more mucus and you're like, this sucks. Or you're like, oh, it's interesting. I had that thought. And then you just keep going, like watching a cloud traveling in the sky and not getting attached to each one. That's the strength of the mental capacity that's been developed over time. And
Mhm.
then to not judge when you're like, I don't know. I did it all the other times. I ignored the cookie, but this one time I wanted the cookie. Okay. Is it going to kill you? Probably not. Right? In the bigger picture of things, it's like the foods that are avoided are, definitely the things that have been determined to contribute towards why these health elements are perpetuating. But it's not the of all be all. If you had avocado right now, it wouldn't kill you. It wouldn't
Yes.
really affect you in a negative way. It's just like, how much can we chisel down to get more of that wholesomeness that gets your body up and running so that when you are in a good place, you can indulge and enjoy
Mhm.
life with a more conscious effort behind it. So if you're like, oh, summer's ending and Labor Day's coming, I actually haven't had a rosé in a long time, and you're like, I want a rosé. It reminds me of that pleasant moment. It's a lovely evening, and it's summer ending, and it's briskness in the air, and you're just feeling the moment. That's the experience, and you're like, okay, cool. And then
Yes.
that will not cause the harm, right? It's the addiction, it's the repetitiveness, it's the unconsciousness that causes more of the harm. And then also you gauge like, where am I at in my body and mind right now? You know, do I want the rosé because it's a really beautiful moment in time that I'm experiencing this experience with, my husband, if you're with your husband, and you're like, this is a nice moment for that. That's a beautiful experience. That's adding to the kama and the artha, right? And dharma is also including not just purpose is to enjoy life. And so if I'm doing that in this moment, and then you're knowing like, yeah, I'm on my regimen, I'm pretty good with everything else, I take my herbs, I do my treatments, then that's good. You know,
Mhm.
the lockdown is more like, oh, we're doing this purge and we have to prepare for the next 3 weeks. This is the time you don't do it at all, right? And then we create more space and then you can enjoy life again. And then, giving yourself permission after you've gained, it's sort of like we're quick to getting pleasure first rather than prolonging pleasure.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
you're not denying pleasure. You're just
That's right.
prolonging, like, I will enjoy this. I will and have at this thing, you know. But right now I'm just gonna wait. I don't need to get it right now.
This is so important. I was really thinking about, what you said earlier about longevity and Ayurveda being about longevity. And it is not just about the getting to this age, right? It's the journey, right? It is not just about extending our life or consuming more time is how I'm experiencing it, but that we can be more present and have more experiences to actually be in the experience of living.
Mhm.
And this feels like truly living. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate your clarification there. I also feel a little bit more grace about my cookies, but I want to be clear that I'm in a mindful relationship now.
Yeah. No, and
Right?
that's
That's the piece.
that's
It's
the
a
key.
mindful relationship.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like
With mhm.
it was funny because like I'm really good with my regimen and um in the past couple of weeks I felt this kind of shift that needed space for that initially, knowing what I know and living how I live, I'm like, I can't allow for this to happen right now. This is not appropriate. This is a little too much. This is a little excess. Da, 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 da. I started going into this like judgment around it. And then I took a step back and I was like, this is something that needs to happen right now in the bigger picture. I'm like, okay.
Mhm.
And it's like I needed to live in certain experiences that I normally wouldn't live in anymore that I've left a long time ago. And I was like, oh, I will observe this, be in this, accept it, um, not deny, resist, or judge it because there's something here. But I had to do all these pauses. It's sort of like they say, cut once, measure twice, right? It's like it's not always impulsive when I make that choice. Um, So I'm like, I will look at all the different angles and go, okay, I drop in to make sure it's proper and it's okay. Like, where is this coming from? Do I need to do this? How is this going to affect me if I do it? If I'm, the various angles. It's a definite conscious effort and becomes pretty quick in a dialogue. And, so an example it's funny because I don't really partake in like any cannabis products or anything like that. And I was out to lunch with a very dear friend and his partner, and his partner, indulges in cannabis, which is great. I think it's great. He's
I
great
think it's
with it.
great.
And I'm like, that's great. I love it. And so at the end of the meal, he's like, I have two gummies. Do you want the two gummies? And it was such a beautiful, cute moment of like his connecting with me that I was like, I will take it. I, I'm not going to use it. I won't tell him. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this podcast. But
He's like, you wasted my gummies.
it's like, what'd you do? But I took them because he was so heartfelt, like wanting to give them to me. And I probably could have said no, he probably would have been fine with it, but it felt so like I will say yes. And then, I regifted the experience, you know, but it's like there was this beautiful exchange of knowing like I will receive it. And then, I don't know if I ever felt guided, that's fine, but my guidance is very clear right now. So like I indulged the experience of it because the bigger picture was like, this is a really pleasant moment, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. It's like my younger brother has Down syndrome, and so whenever I see him, he always finds that he wants to get me like a sugary treat from like the store that he works from, and he gets me like a Snickers because I still have Snickers back in the day. I'm not gonna say don't get this from me, So he gives it to me. He's like, oh, he's so happy when he gives it to me. I'm like, I'll take the Snickers. I'll maybe gift it at Halloween to some other kids, the trick-or-treaters. But I'm like, I will receive the experience of this because it's just like enjoying that and I don't need to. But
Yes.
if my neighbor makes, you know, a strawberry shortcake, which is not the best combination, but she wholeheartedly made it for me. She gave me a slice. I was like, I will take this because everything else that I do will sustain and metabolize it in a positive way without causing any or minimal affliction.
Yes.
Right. If she gave it to me during my purge, my own cleanse protocol, I would freeze it and take it out at a party. Like it's the experience of it. It's like you want to receive things in a heartfelt way.
Yes. This this is I think a beautiful message to end on
Hmm.
around this heartfelt exchange.
Yeah.
And also is connected, I think, to a vision of life that lives and is rooted in love, rooted in a commitment to something beyond transaction. And this is not transactional health or care. This is a kind of care that is relational and deep. And I just want to thank you, Antonia Aragona, Doctor of Ayurvedic Medicine. You are always bringing the gifts. I am excited to have our next conversation. Excited for the folks who joined us today and the folks who have asked for the recording who will receive it. And also we invite you to check out stillpointayurveda.com to connect with Dr. A. And we hope that you will come back for our next conversation. Stay tuned for the Trust Your Gut podcast with Black Mama Body. And be well.
Be well. Come on, come on.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. A. Thanks,
Yes.
y'all. It's so good to have you here. See you later.